One of the most read tier objections to the New Testament goes something like this. Paul says, we're justified by faith apart from works. James says, we're justified by works, not by faith alone. Checkmate, Christians, the Bible contradicts itself. Muslims will use this to say that Paul hijacked the original message of Jesus, and skeptics will use it to say that the Bible doesn't speak with one voice. So the question isn't about whether this sounds bad at first glance, it's whether these texts can actually be harmonized. Let's start with one of the most common Christian explanations. A typical Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox approach says that Paul and James are talking about different kinds of works. Paul, on this view, rejects ceremonial works of the Jewish law, like circumcision, food laws, and other ethnic boundary markers. James, meanwhile, is talking about moral works, obedience, and righteous living. If that's right, the tension disappears. That said, I hate to disappoint my Orthodox and Catholic friends, but I don't think this survives a very close reading of Paul. Paul doesn't limit works or even works of the law to Jewish ceremonies. His argument in Romans 1-3 is about universal human guilt. Jew and Gentile alike stand condemned because the law exposes sin and leaves everyone deserving of God's wrath. In Romans 1, Paul calls Gentiles idol-worshipping degenerates. And then, in Romans 2, he turns around on the Jews and calls them hypocrites for knowing the law, teaching it, and not keeping it. His point isn't just ritual failure, it's moral failure. Same thing happens in Galatians 3. Paul quotes Deuteronomy. Cursed is everyone who does not abide by all the things written in the book of the law. The curse isn't about missing a feast day. It's about failing to obey God, period. And it gets even clearer when Paul talks about works without mentioning the law at all. In Ephesians 2:8-9, it says that we're saved by grace through faith, not a result of works, lest any man should boast. No qualifier. Before Christ, we're dead in sin and by nature children of wrath. Dead people don't save themselves. In Titus 3:5, Paul says that God saved us not by works done by us in righteousness, but according to his mercy. Works done in righteousness are moral actions, and Paul excludes them. And then in 2 Timothy 1:9, God saved us not because of our works, but because of his own purpose and grace. Again, no Jewish law in view here, just works as such. So the idea that Paul only rejects justification by ceremonial works doesn't fit the data. Paul excludes all works as the basis of justification. Now, that brings us up to a very common Protestant response, often associated with John Calvin. On this view, James uses justify differently. Paul means declare righteous, while James means prove or show righteous, sometimes framed as justification before people instead of before God. Theologically, I get the instinct, but lexically, it runs into some problems. James quotes Genesis 15:6, the very same verse that Paul uses, where Abraham is counted righteous before God. James also uses save and justify in clearly a salvation-related sense. There's no hint that he's just talking about mere human approval, and the verb he uses is the same one Paul uses, normally meaning declare righteous. So we can't solve this by redefining words. Here's my take. James and Paul are addressing different errors. Paul is confronting the Judaizers, people who thought that the Gentiles had to keep all the Jewish law in order to have right standing before God. James, on the other hand, is confronting antinomianism, the idea that mental assent alone saves you no matter how you live. James is not denying justification by faith. He's denying that dead faith saves. So when James says faith without works is dead, he's not saying that works add merit, that add justification. He's saying that works reveal whether faith is real. That's why he uses Rahab. James doesn't say Rahab was justified when she stopped being a prostitute or after years of obedience or once she got her life straightened out. He said that she was justified when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. Full stop. That's one act, flowing from trust in Israel's God, which is enough to show that she had genuine faith. James isn't pointing to a quota of good works. He's pointing to the kind of action that reveals genuine faith. And James himself rules out works as the foundation for justification. He says that if you keep the whole law and stumble at one point, you're guilty of all of it. He also admits that we all stumble in many ways. So accumulated obedience adding to your justification here is off the table. And this isn't James versus Paul anyway. At the Jerusalem Council, Peter says that the law was a yoke that they couldn't bear and that people are saved by faith in Jesus. And James agrees. This wasn't just about food laws and circumcision because we know that Peter ate kosher and that these guys were circumcised. What James is saying is that real faith actually shows up. If I say that I trust my doctor, but I don't take the medicine he prescribes, no one thinks that that trust is real. Faith works the same way. At the end of the day, Paul and James, they're teaching the same thing. Paul says that works don't justify, and James says that faith that never works is dead. Same gospel, same justification, just different audiences who have different problems. Before anyone starts a mini reformation in the comments or queues up a Catholic or Orthodox response video, relax. This is just a skeptical objection and how I personally resolve it. Most of my content is what all Christians can agree on, and I'm not going to fight you over this. I totally get that Protestants, Orthodox, and Catholics nuance this all in different ways. We are all still bros. If you find these videos helpful, feel free to check out my Patreon and consider joining. You'll get early access to videos before they come out, be a part of our private group chat, and you'll help me to continue to put out content that spreads and defends the gospel. Thank you so much for watching.